Shavua Tov, welcome back. So last time we discussed, or we opened up the question, who is the real I? Because when a person is not aligned with themselves, they're inevitably going to start looking for outside signals to give them their sense of value, their sense of meaning and purpose. But it's going to be extrinsic. It's going to be external, as we said. And something that is external will never be able to supply the necessary oxygen, the necessary life for the true self to thrive. As a matter of fact, over time, it's going to create a greater vacuum than was initially present. As we discussed before, the initial vacuum is there to invite the person to start searching within themselves. And that's a necessary vacuum. That's a necessary feeling. That's a feeling of invitation. But when a person starts drawing upon extrinsic variables in order to give themselves an intrinsic self for it, we obviously understand that not only is going to be a mismatch, but all the anxieties and all the issues starts arising at that point. So if a person is walking around perpetually feeling empty, it's not because they're truly empty, but as the Mishnah in Pt. 2 says, that one should look into a container as to what's inside the container. And what's inside the container of our body consciousness, our neshama, our godly soul. And that godly soul bears within it God's unique purpose for each and every one of us. Hasidic philosophy teaches us that the true us, the true I, is our souls. When I'll search and find my soul, then I will find myself. The Zohar in Kabbalah explains that the word ani, I, is comprised of 3 letters, Aleph, Nun, Yud. Those letters are an anagram of the word Ein, nothingness. In other words, the Kabbalah explains that the neshama is ultimately batul and mevutal to Hashem. The neshama in itself is nullified towards Hashem. In other words, the true sense of the neshama is expressed specifically not in ego, but just the opposite, humility. The more humble the person is, the more they are aligned with their true selves. The humility that we're speaking about is not a sense of, God forbid, worthlessness, as the previous Rabbi explained in the discourse, and the Rabbi brought it up in Shavuot in 1950, that humility doesn't, God forbid, imply worthlessness or emptiness. I'm a nobody and nothing. That's chaz v'shalom, a setup for depression. Rather, it's understanding that my entire self is an expression of God. I did not create myself. I did not endow myself with strengths, abilities, powers, knowledge, nor with weaknesses in character flaws and challenge. All of those were endowed to me by God. And if they were endowed to me by God, then I must utilize them correctly. In other words, true humility doesn't mean the absence of self. It means being aligned with yourself. And your true selves, and every one of our true selves, is God. And so how do we align ourselves with our true selves? Specifically, with our aligning ourselves with the values and the responsibilities that the Torah allots to each and every one of us, each one according to their settings and so on and so forth. As the Torah the word Torah comes from the word hora'ah, instructions, and the Torah instructs each and every one of us, wherever we may be, wherever we are sent, how to utilize ourselves in order to meet the purpose for which we were sent into this world. And of course we know, as the Torah says, Zeh lumat zeh asa Elokim. To everything God created the holy and then its counterpart, the good and its counterpart. God created everything and its counterpart. So the ani, the true I, which is a piece of God, the sense of humility also was created within ourselves with a sense with a counterpart, which is ego. Who am I? I'm my ego. I'm my body consciousness. I'm my needs and my wants and my and each and every one of us has to choose, and this is a constant choice. Not just when we come across a fork in the road as to should I act good or the opposite, but rather the choice is constant. Who am I? And to live that to the best of our ability, to express that in the most practical sense possible. When we think about this, even at the most current rudimentary level from a scientific perspective, and quantum science perspective certainly, the entire world, us of course within this, is energy. Everything is energy. And this energy in itself was created by the Creator. The flow of energy, the movement of energy, north, south, east, and west, are all part of God's orchestrations. And to recognize that every single being in this world, in the four tiers of creation, where there's inanimate, plant life, animal life, and of course humans, and then there's us, each one was created in order to reveal and express God's essential intent, and each one does it through the facade and through the abilities and strengths that God endowed it. So, for example, when we listen to music, you ever thought about this? You listen to music and it sounds very delightful. What's happening? What's actually happening? The conscious soul is decoding these notes and these patterns and these sounds as something inspiring. Why? Because it's endowed with the ability to discern and to take in and to decipher the inner meaning of these notes and these sounds and so on and so forth. And it touches very spiritual underpinning of our being. And when you think about it, and this is parenthetical, if we were nothing more than in the evolved amoebas, then of what purpose would this, in our evolutionary stance, would music come to be, other than to charge people up to war? Or every single aspect and every single talent and every single frame of our existence is endowed to us by God in order to express Him As the Mishnah says, Kol ma shebara Kodesh Baruch Hu ba'olamo lo bara l'chvado. Everything that God created in His world is created in order to reveal His glory. So when we listen to music, what are we listening to? We're energy, who are able to discern energy and are taking in a frequency that is emitted through an instrument. And all of that is within the framework of the human being, of the consciousness. When the Alter Rebbe was in jail, the founder of the Chabad movement, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the Baal HaTanya, the author of the Tanya and the Shulchan Aruch, when he was in jail, as we spoke about many times, the deeper meaning of it and so on and so forth, but when he was in jail, all the ministers who were very educated through their interrogation of the Alter Rebbe came to truly marvel at his unique intelligence, his unique perspective of life, his understanding of life, the depth. As we know, the Torah encompasses all the sciences, astrology and biology. When you look into the Torah, you'll find everything in it. For example, the Zohar says, and this is going back thousands of years, that the earth is round. It's a sphere. And this is at the time where people believed that the earth was flat, and anyone who rose up and says perhaps it's not, then the entire world would shut them down. The Torah says that there are humans living on the other side of the earth. It's like, and at the time where the primitive science and understanding of geography was saying, what do you mean on the bottom? How do they not fall off? The Zohar says that the earth spins. It's constantly rotating. This is way before the science of astrology developed, and certainly before the understanding of gravity and the revolution of this planet and so on and so forth. Everything's in the Torah. The ministers were highly impressed and taken aback by the Alter Rebbe's sheer wisdom and understanding of life. And so one of the top ministers disguised himself as just a layman, because he had some pressing questions regarding the Bible, regarding the Torah. And when he approached the Alter Rebbe in disguise and opened up conversation with him, one of the most pressing questions he had was the interaction that God had with Adam after Adam was warned not to eat from the tree of knowledge, and indeed he did eat from the tree of knowledge. And we know that God confronted Adam, but not by accusing him, by the very first word is, where are you, Ayeka? So the minister asks the Alter Rebbe, but he is God. He knows where Adam is. Why would he ask him where he is? So the Alter Rebbe cites the famous Rashi that Hashem was teaching us derech eretz, healthy, holy manners, that you don't just jump into a pressing issue. You start with the preliminaries. How are you? Where are you? And so on and so forth. And the minister wasn't satisfied. He learned this commentary, but he says it still doesn't satisfy my question. But then the Alter Rebbe answered him, when a man of 52 years old, and at that point when the previous Rebbe related this Maisa, this narrative, says that the Alter Rebbe actually cited the exact age of the minister. So when a man was 52 years old, and he lives the life of a minister, God asks you in Yiddish, "Wo bist du?" Where are you? In other words, where are you in the mission that I sent you into this world? in the purpose in which I endowed the soul and you created your body and so on and so forth and placed you. Where are you? Are you confident that you're marching in the right direction? The minister was highly taken aback by this. The divine inspiration and the sheer magnificence of this answer really took him aback. What is the Alter Rebbe teaching us? This is a question that each and every one of us has to ask ourselves. But not just we're asking ourselves. God is asking this from us on a day-to-day basis. And every single day we must consider the answer that we could give, and an authentic answer based on our authentic selves. Am I living my life, or am I living a byproduct of someone else's life? Am I byproduct of my culture, of the style of parenting I got? And sure, the Rambam does say that we're social creatures, and inevitably we are affected by our social settings, our nature and our nurture. But in all that, the central point of gravity with ourselves is myself, my real self. We know that the very first conversation that Hashem had with the very first prototype of Judaism, Abraham, is recorded in the Torah. Abraham was 75 years old. And as we spoke about on Shavuot, Avraham Avinu revealed or started tapping into his faith, his innate faith, at the tender age of 3, and started searching as per the Rambam's explanation. He started searching with his mind, with his heart. What is this world? What's behind this world? Who's running this world? Is it possible that the world is running itself? It just came to be by itself? We know that our sages give us a beautiful mashal. When science says that the world is just a coincidence, it evolved. The Torah gives us a beautiful parable to this by saying, if an author took a bottle or container of ink, how many times would the author have to throw this container upon the paper for the ink to fall in an exact arrangement of letters, words, sentences, paragraphs, themes, protagonists, antagonists, chapters, development of character, and plot, and so on and so forth? How many times would the author have to throw the ink upon the paper for it to arrange as a perfectly sound book? And the obvious answer is it will never happen. And even if we take not ink, let's just say we have a bag of millions of letters and shake up the bag and then toss and empty out the contents of the bag onto even a humongous canvas. How many times would the shaker have to throw this and empty out the contents of this bag for the letters to fall in the exact arrangement of words and sentences, paragraphs, etc., a cohesive book? How many times? 1 billion times? 1 trillion times? 10 trillion times? For an intricate book with plots and subplots and how many times? And let's take even higher. If it wasn't just shaken up and strewn, let's just say you let a chimp do it, pick out letters and put it, or even higher, a baby or a child, just to randomly pick out letters and put them in an order. How many times would they have to do this in order to create a book? And we understand the odds are not just astronomical, they're almost impossible. Impossible. As a matter of fact, I once heard from one of my students who is a pediatrician. He said that when you think about the scientific perspective of the human development evolution, it would make it nearly impossible that day to day babies are being born with all their organs and all their sinews and their hands, Baruch Hashem, their legs with 10 fingers and 10 toes and a head and 2 eyes. Because if it's all random, how many times can you replicate random in such a cohesive way? So Avraham started searching. Is it possible that the world is just running itself? It created itself? And by the time he was 40 years old, Avraham came to logically recognize, that there is a creator, and this world is not just running amok. And at that point, Avraham not only started learning, he also started teaching and started delving and so on and so forth. But the very first communication that the Torah records between Creator and Avraham, Hashem and Avraham, was in Parshat Lech Lecha, the third portion of the Torah. And the portion begins, Hashem spoke to Avraham, saying, Lech Lecha, go for yourself. Mi'artzecha, from your country, from Umulatcha, from your birthplace, Umebeit Avicha, and from your father's home, to the land that I will show you. Hence began the service of refining the world and so on and so forth. But if we focus just on the first particular pasuk, the first particular verse, Hashem says to Avraham, Lech Lecha, go for yourself. One of our great sages teaches Lech Lecha, which we can conventionally translate to go for yourself. In other words, as Rashi says, go will be beneficial for you if you go. But where should he go? We understand from the verse, to the land that I'll show you, Eretz Canaan, Eretz Yisrael. But one of our great sages notes that the mission statement is right in the beginning of the first communication, namely the first 2 words. Lech Lecha. Go to you. Not for you. Go to you. In other words, you need to start traveling in order to discover the you. And how do you discover? First and foremost, you need to go away from certain social conditionings. And not only social conditioning, even genetic conditioning. Lech lecha mi'artzecha, go and leave your country. In other words, on one layer means go and leave the culture. And because at what point can a person say, I'm not a byproduct of my culture? I'm not just an indoctrinated human being. Only if they're able to discern and distinguish their true selves from the culture they were brought in. Not to say that we should ignore the cultures, but at a certain point, a person needs to know who the I is, who is interacting with the culture that they live in order to discern whether it's positive or not. Does it require me to grow, to reveal more, or does it require me to abstain and to create boundaries around myself because this is toxic, this is going to hide me? Chassidus explains even deeper, me'artzecha me'artziyut shelcha. The word artzecha, your land, your country, also implies your corporality. You want to discover yourself. learn how to distinguish between your true self and your body consciousness. As we spoke about several weeks ago, but the famous mashal, the famous parable that Rabbi Dean Steinsaltz alav shalom gave, that a human being is like a magnificent building which possesses both the penthouse as well as the basement. And the penthouse is above the city, and you have a magnificent view of the city. It's closer. It has fresh air and beautiful, and so on and so forth. Obviously, penthouses are much more lavish. In contrast to that, the basement is a dark and gloomy place where there is all kinds of unsavory creatures and so on and so forth. And the person needs to distinguish between themselves. Who am I? Am I the top floor or am I the bottom floor? In order to understand that, you need to first and foremost distinguish yourself from the bottom floor to understand, to get a view from above, a perspective, not just a perception. So you first and foremost, one needs to distinguish themselves from their corporality. I'm not just my hunger, I'm just not my biological needs. Because the biological needs are important to tend to from the sense of self. Otherwise, by confusing my biological needs for myself, it's going to actually distort the sense of self. It's going to and eventually completely create an incrustation around the self. The second layer that Avraham was instructed to leave was Wimu Malad Chav, and from your birthplace. Over there, our commentators explain that this is referring to our genetics. We know that in recent history, medicine is coming to understand how much epigenetics plays a role in the sense of self and development. That we don't just inherit our parents' skin tone or their hair and so on and so forth, but we actually inherit their emotional and mental dispositions. Situational issues that came up and weren't resolved are transferred down to their children. It says that 98% of one's shalom bayit is his parents versus her parents. And so in order to really distinguish between my parents' life and my life, I have to draw a fine line and discover who am I. Not to say that I have to ignore my nature, that I was endowed from my parents, through God. From God through my parents. But to understand, but that's them, there's an I, and if I was endowed with their situations, what is the I meant to accomplish through these situations, because of the situation? But I certainly don't have to be a byproduct of those situations. And the next tier is Mi Beit Avicha, and from your father's home. And that is a lot. That's synonymous and implies logic, one's intellectual understanding. One has to understand that they're not their thoughts. The thoughts, as we spoke about, and we're going to further develop in tonight's Tanya class, here at 3 Grace Avenue at 8 p.m. Shameless plug. But the thoughts are a garment of the soul. It's not the soul in itself. So in order to really discern myself, I have to divest myself of everything that's not the true me. Otherwise, I risk starting to flood me with all kinds of things that seem to, like, it's going to plug that empty feeling, that hole, but then other issues are going to start coming out. Where Torah is giving us the true perspective on who each and every one of us are. The Creator didn't just create the world and left us to rummage like a blind person in a urinal, like trying to figure out what's dirty here. That's God created the world with a tachlit, with an ultimate purpose, a divine purpose, a magnificent purpose, a truly luminescent purpose for each and every one of us. But for that purpose to occur, we need to first and foremost be somewhat aligned with our true selves. And if we cannot be aligned with our true selves because we never figure it out, well, one of the best ways to elicit the true self is to start behaving in the manner in which God prescribed in His Torah, in His blueprint to creation. And the behavior is going to elicit, especially the more consistent this behavior is going to elicit the true self out. But this begins with this question, where am I in life? And sometimes this, Baruch Hashem, could happen in a very positive way, when parents help their children, and this is the ultimate function of a parent, to facilitate the child to know their identity, to know who they are, and then their purpose. In psychology called intrinsic self, and then their personal competence. And sometimes, if a person is not giving, they'll have to dig their way out. They'll have to discover this through life. As I once heard a very great axiom, and my lowest self, when I hit a very low place, I discover who I wasn't. Because sometimes in the venture to discover the self, but without understanding who the self is, then a person starts connecting to things that have nothing to do with them, as we spoke before. But it doesn't do it. It just doesn't do it. And so if a person is authentic with themselves, and they want to discover their authentic self, then they'll discover that this is not who I am. This is not good. It's not doing it for me. So they'll come to the sense of self by process of elimination. This is not me, and eventually, it's like there is two ways of learning. One from in addition, and one in subtraction. The previous Rabbi explained this in a discourse in 1940. Process of addition means you start with a truly magnificent yet very intense point, which is too lofty to be able to grasp. So the teacher starts layering up this point with different parables. Like it says, Shlomo HaMelech was able, in his wisdom, his godly wisdom, able to give 3,000 parables to each teaching. So even the most simplest person, a child, will be able to truly understand the most loftiest point. But the child or the simple person understands this loftiest point when it's enclosed in many, many layers of parables. And then there is process of subtraction, which is you start with the 3,000 layer and you start divesting layer after layer until you come to the most deepest point. And so this is what stands behind this axiom. In my lowest point, I realized who I wasn't. You think that you are here to have, like we spoke about, the world is your bathtub, and you're here to play with your rubber ducky and your little toys and your cars. And from time to time, this pesky parent comes and tries to put water on your head. It's like, that's a distraction from my actual fun time over here. I'm here to play. Also, I need to put soap on me. We understand that this is how we entice a child to get into a bathtub, because a child is apprehensive about water. But adults realize that the world that you have to get into a shower to clean. It's not there to shower time is not playtime. But if a person doesn't understand that and they unfortunately didn't develop and they're an adult child, not childlike but just childish, then they will inevitably come to mistake that this world is a bathtub and they're here just to acquire another toy, another car. You know, as the world says, the only difference between boys and men are the price of their toys. So this doesn't, God forbid, imply that we shouldn't have nice things in this world and we shouldn't have expensive things, but the question is for what purpose? If the purpose of those things is just to endow me with a sense of self, I have 4 cars, I have this, and I have that, then you're escaping from yourself, and eventually you won't even utilize these things. They'll just stand there collecting dust. Because they'll do you for 1 second, and then the next second you lose interest in them. However, if the true self is defined and understands that I need this in order to perform my purpose in this world, then that's something altogether different. And therefore, the person will be much more accurate with their needs and wants, etc. Let's go back to the talk. In last week's session, we posed a question regarding Hillel Hazaken, Hillel the Elder, the president of the Jewish people in the time of the Second Temple era, towards the end of the Second Temple era. And he said, and the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that we began with, in Ethics of the Fathers that we began with, quotes Hillel by saying, Im ein ani li mili. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Now we could, after everything we discussed, we could fully appreciate the sheer holiness and the depth of what Hillel was teaching us. So long as the ani, the I, doesn't belong to me, because the teaching is im ein ani li. If I'm not for myself, in other words, if the I doesn't belong to me, in other words, so long as I'm not connecting to my intrinsic self, to my purpose, my shlichut, the purpose for which God sent me into this world, then mili, who is going to be for me? In other words, there's no me. I have no foundation for life then. In other words, one must literally own themselves, own up to themselves, understand how great they are, how important they are, how unique they are to Hashem's plan in this world. Yeah.
Is this also what you taught related to always connecting to 3 handles, me, Hashem, and the purpose in any moment? Is this part of the mechanics of that?
This is chapter 3. What we're learning in chapter 1 is develops. However, in contrast to that, the next stanza is Ukshani latzmi. But if I'm only for myself, then I'm nothing, right? So what is the depth of this? When the I is only ego-driven, only for myself, only me, myself, and I. In other words, my entire self is focused on attaining honor and wealth and pleasures and everything, and that's my entire life. In other words, a life of ego, a life of egocentric incrustation. Then I have no real value, no intrinsic value in this world. Then I'm nothing. Because then I'm nothing more than an animal. I'm here to eat, to drink, to procreate, to get a shelter, to protect myself. That's it. As we spoke about in last week's class, when Hashem created the animals, He endowed each and every species with a basic instinct of survivability. And as we said last week, they don't need to go to school for engineering, for construction, for all of these things or for flight, in order to fly, to create nests and shelters and so on and so forth. It's endowed within them, and it's already there from the get-go. They might perhaps need to develop certain muscular abilities, but it's there from the beginning. Whereas in contrast, Hashem spoke to us and told us, be fruitful and multiply and fill the world and conquer. It means in order for you to perpetuate truth, you have to connect fruitful and multiply, as we spoke about last week. It means, what it means to bring a baby into this world means to draw spirituality into the physicality, a soul into a physical body. And to conquer, not to vanquish or destroy, but to conquer the earthliness, the worldliness, the corporality. You cannot be defined by the corporality, you must define the corporality. And that's what Hillel also meant when we mentioned last week in the Talmud. It says when Hillel would attend the festivities of Simchas Beit HaShoava, the celebration of the drawing of the water to saturate to use for the services the next morning on the altar, and all the processions that occurred and so forth, as we spoke about last week. What did he say? When I'm here, everything is here. Imani anikan hakol kan. And the converse, v'im ani ein kan anikan. If I'm not here, who's here? What does that mean? What's that mean? If I'm here, everything is here. Means if the real I is here, present in the moment. To live in the moment. What does it mean to live in the moment? That the true, authentic you is present and is discerning the moment from the lens of the true you, which is a piece of God. With the strength and the merit of the mitzvah that is available to do that moment. In other words, the intrinsic me is here right now, then everything is here. In other words, when one is connected to their true self, to their souls, to their godly soul, and this is what perpetuates your happiness and so on and so forth, then you realize you're missing nothing. But as he continues, says, but however, if I'm not here, what does that mean? If I'm not connected to my true self, and I'm only connecting to extrinsic momentary things that could right now make me quote unquote feel happy. In other words, it's wealth, it's honor, it's this or that. Then who's here? Certainly not me. The car is here. The party's here. What happens when the car and the party is not here? Or when the party is not loud enough anymore for you? Or the car is not shining enough for you? Then what? Where are you? Who bist du? Ayeka. We'll continue this in Mr. Hashem tomorrow.